Welcome to Dad Mode, God, Grit, and Goals. I am your host, Mike Tobias, and I am so excited today. I've got a guest who is shaking things up in the best way possible. He's a dad of three, a street preacher, a former skeptic, and he's built a following of over 50,000 people on TikTok just by talking about Jesus in raw, real, and powerful ways. And I want to welcome and help me welcome Devin Wilbourn. Devin, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, what's going on, Mike? I appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, super excited to have you on. Man, I've been following you on TikTok, and I love what you're doing. And I was so excited because I reached out to you cold, and you answered me. So I was excited about that. And I want to jump right in. And we had an opportunity to chat the other day, and you just shared your story with me, and it just really struck me because you spent time just really seeking the truth. And so my question is, can truth seeking really lead to full surrender? And that's where your story starts, right?
Yeah, I would say, man, it's funny you say it that way because I think a lot of times we tend to hold things to be true, and we think because we hold them to be true, that's what makes it true. And I realized I was probably about 19 when it happened, and it seems silly to say it out loud because, like, once you actually realize it, you feel very stupid when you actually realize how ridiculous it sounds. But I just, I realized I'm like, me believing something is true doesn't make it true. If something is true, it's true apart from me, and I am the discoverer of that thing. I'm observing it. It's not true because I think it's true, right?
Truth stands on its own, right?
100%. Yeah. And to contextualize that a little bit, because that thought didn't just come out of nowhere. It really came from the fact that I grew up in kind of like the Left Behind era of Christianity, and so I grew up with this idea that's like, if you even think that God doesn't exist for a moment, right, you could like die in that moment, and then you're not saved because you've rejected God. And so you kind of grew up with this fear of ever like actually thinking through the process of, okay, what is God? Does God actually exist? All the kind of like what I'd call like first principles, those first principles were given to me. They weren't things that I ever came to on my own. And so when I hit that point where suddenly I had to, I was kind of faced with those first principles for a moment there, in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't allow myself to think that God doesn't exist because that could mean I'm not saved and all this other stuff. And then it just struck me. I was like, but wait a minute though. If God exists, then it doesn't matter what I think. Like, it doesn't matter whether I think he exists or not, because he exists. It's like, in fact, I was like, all the stuff that I think is true, I should be able technically to take that and just toss it up in the air and pretend like it's not true. And if it's true, then it'll bear itself out. And that realization was, I think, and again, it sounds so silly, saying it now, but in my 19-year-old brain, that was a profound realization. And it freed me, to be honest. It really freed me to kind of approach these questions in a much more open and honest way, where I could really go, okay, let me just consider the possibility that there isn't a God for a minute. Like, how does that feel? What does that look like? What does that change? And it allowed me to really process that information in I think a much healthier way, to say the least.
Yeah, I think what's remarkable about that, I think most people either have a faith because they were raised in a faith, they kind of stick with it, or they fall away. And
right.
And then I think for the most part, people don't really spend a whole lot of time thinking about their beliefs and what they believe in and why they believe in it or not. My wife
100%.
Is a high she's high belief, like she just believes. And for me, I'm like, but why? Why? is this real? And so you were sharing that you kind of studied your way to belief. Like, walk us through that season.
Yeah, it was well, I mean, it started at that moment I described when I was 19, where I really started like asking those questions and allowing myself to kind of think outside that box. And I think basically the way it went down was, I started obviously with that question where I'm going, okay, maybe there isn't a God. Like, where is the starting point? And that was really, I think, the beginning of the process was trying to figure out, like, where do you begin? Because we all, like, every one of us is born into some type of sociological system, and that sociological system has certain inherent beliefs that are kind of baked into it. Like in America, we're built in. It's like built freedom is built into us, right?
Right, right.
And so people joke that,
It's
like,
a given.
yeah, it's like America's like number one skill is confidence. It's like we just have this absurd, ungrounded confidence for no apparent reason whatsoever. But it's built into our culture, and we're all just kind of born into that. Whereas other cultures, they don't have that. They have, other things that are kind of born into their cultures. And so it's kind of the same thing with our beliefs about, like, God, about the universe, all those things, that it's kind of built into our conditioning of whatever it is, whatever structure we're born into. And a lot of times, people don't really, what I find anyway, is that people tend to form their belief systems out of a response to either their pain or their progress. And so that's kind of where they end up. But for me, it was really just like a weird inflection point where I grew up in this very moral, very Christian household. And so I was fairly sheltered. And by the time I got out into the world, I hadn't done a lot of things. I hadn't, I never drank, never smoked, never partied, all the things that like normal teenagers did. I missed all of that. And so by the time I'm like 19, 20, suddenly I'm getting exposed to these things. And I had the opportunity, just because life and the way my life kind of played out. I was at a place where I was pretty well trained in some psychological tactics and other things that I had studied, well beyond my peers at that point in time. And so I realized, I'm like, man, I could use these things that I've learned and really get whatever I want. You could get the girls, I could, get the job, I could step on anybody I need to step on. And what I found is that there was this kind of like moral compass, this underlying morality that held me back. It held me back from going out to the parties. It held me back from being the jerk that just goes and tries to get the girl instead of actually caring about her feelings and who she is as a person and all the other stuff that I was taught.
Yep.
It's like, all of those things were kind of these underlying inhibitors, and it kind of felt like a governor on a car where I keep getting up to like 95 and I'm going, I know this car could go 250, but something's holding me back and I need to figure out like what that is. And so when I realized that, that was kind of the starting point for me, was going, okay, I have this moral compass here. Why is it there? Is it mine? Is it something that was given to me by my parents? Is it something that's like baked in? What is this thing? And then that kind of led me into the question of, well, wait a minute. I mean, all of this is really centered on this concept that there's this God that one day I'm going to meet and have to give an account to. And so I think the underlying question here is, does that God exist? And that was really where it all began. It was like, okay, well, because if that God doesn't exist, like if there really is no God, then all this stuff that we're doing here is really dumb. Like this, all this effort for legacy, it's like, who cares? You're not going to be there to enjoy it. All this effort for like raising a family or being a good person. It's like, who cares? Get whatever pleasure you possibly can out of this life. Like hedonism to me is the most logical conclusion if there is no God, because you have such a short amount of time here. It's like, unless there's a real reason to think that you're somehow going to solve the problem of death in your lifetime, which, God willing, somebody maybe is that person, right? But I knew I wasn't that guy. Biology was not a strong suit. So I realized very quickly, I'm like, solving the problem of death, that's not going to happen. And so if there's no God, then maximum hedonism is the thing. I'm going to
spoken like a real man. Hedonism is the way,
that's
to go.
it, man. Yeah, I'm focusing 100% of my effort on. I'm going to make like 150, 200 grand as fast as I possibly can, and then I'm moving to a foreign country where they're technologically inept, and I'm going to take all my money and I'm going to buy an army and I'm going to become a warlord. that was my plan.
There you go.
I was like,
there you go.
So, but I thought of that, and I'm like, this to me just makes sense, and it's funny. I don't know. The Lord has wired me for. I would call it like rationale, but it's extreme rationale that pushes into what seems irrational, right?
Yeah. You push to the limit, right?
That's it. Exactly. Yeah. It's like, where's the line?
Yeah.
I need to figure out where that is, because that's where I'm going.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that was kind of my thinking. And but then I was like, but then again, if there is a God, like if there really is something that happens after this life, and it wasn't even so much, a lot of times people like to make the argument, it's like, oh, well, you need a God to be a moral person. I'm like, no, that's not it. It's that I recognize the fact that if there is something beyond this time that we have here, then that means that there is an eternity of life that exists beyond this 90 to 100 years. So the time that I'm here is a blip in comparison to the time that I spend there. Mm-hmm. And so it's not about whether there's a God that's going to hold me accountable and I need to be moral because of that, or it had nothing to do with that. It was just recognizing that the time I spend here is so short comparative to the time that I spend there, then that needs to be the context that I live my life by if there really is something after this. And so that was kind of the way I was thinking about it, was it's how do you contextualize your life so that you can make decisions about like what you should or shouldn't value, and it kind of comes back to what I said at the beginning. People like value legacy, or they value all these things, but when you get under the hood, it's like, but why? Mm-hmm. It's like the reality is that it is entirely irrational to value any of those things if you don't believe there's something after this. There's no gain from that. Like it's truly an irrational, and I would even just call it's an emotional endeavor. It's not a rational endeavor. And to me, I wanted my decision making to be based in rationale first. And then from there, if that rationale led me to say, okay, I can reasonably conclude there is nothing after this, then all right, getting all the gusto and that's it, Yeah. And so that was kind of like phase one. And then from there, that really led into having to kind of create a rubric for like, how do I think about this, because I realized I didn't want to be influenced by my Judeo-Christian heritage. I also didn't want to jump to the extreme and go like all the way to the other end of atheism either. I really tried to figure out is there a way to come up with like a box that I could go sit inside of where I have no outside influences and think about this from inside that box. And that was what I was really trying to work out at that moment. And so the way I looked at it is I said, okay, let's start with some fundamental assumptions, right? And that was where I began. So my first fundamental assumption was there's no way I'm going to prove definitively that there is or is not a God in my lifetime. People have been trying to prove this for thousands of years. Nobody's proved it yet. And based on everything that I understand about just what we know, there is still so much that we don't know. The likelihood that I'm going to be able to demonstrate in any type of material way that there is or is not a God, it's not a realistic thing that is going to happen, right? And so that to me kind of brought me to a place of saying, okay, so I need to start with the understanding that I'm not going to come to a definitive proof statement, and that is going to be the thing that I can stand on and say, this is what I believe and this is why I believe it. I realized that there's kind of what I would call a rational cliff, essentially, where you push all the way to the end of what evidence can support, and then at some point you have to make a jump and then see what happens on the other side of that rationale. And so that essentially led me to the realization that agnosticism is actually the most rational position of all the positions. A lot of Christians like to argue for, rational Christianity, and I actually disagree with that. I actually think Christianity is pretty irrational, along with any other religion. And same thing with atheism, which is ironic because atheists like to claim that they're the most rational, which to me, I look at their position, I'm going, this is actually like the least rational position, which I'll get into later. But anyway, all that to say, I found that agnosticism actually I felt like was the most rational, because if you're looking at it through just pure rationale, the only real rational conclusion you can come to is there's too much to know and not enough time to know it. And so the answer cannot be known in this form, in this context that we currently operate within. And so if it can't be known, then that means at some point we have to basically say there's evidence potentially of something beyond what our rational comprehension, our rational way of understanding things, what we can see, what we can smell, what we can observe, right? It's what can we observe through our rational material experience. If we can find that there is evidence that something might be beyond that experience, then that means that we have to leave the rational framework in order to experience it, in order to deal with whatever that is, basically. And so that was like my first fundamental assumption, was that that at some point I'm going to hit a cliff, and I'm going to have to push beyond what's demonstratable in the material in order to move to whatever that next step is. And so that was kind of like step one, I guess. And then from there, my next kind of basis was, well, I don't accept agnosticism, because agnosticism was just not a good enough answer for me. And I felt like there was enough potential evidence that something was acting on this material realm from outside of it, that I just felt like agnosticism was kind of a lazy position to hold, basically. And not to say that all agnostics are lazy, because they're not. There are some that are
I think
quite diligent.
Yeah, I know a few, and they feel they are super rational. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And they are. Yeah. They absolutely are. And that's the thing. Like, I would agree with them. It's so funny. People, a lot of times they're like, wait, you're a Christian, you can't say that. And I'm like, yeah, I can, because it's true. Like, they are the most rational. It's just, I believe there's something greater than rationale. And that's the difference.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so that was kind of like my first fundamental assumption is I'm not going to come to a conclusion, but rather I'm going to have to look at evidence and then make some decisions, make some assumptions, and then see where those assumptions take me, basically. And so that was like the starting point. And then from there, I started looking at, okay, like, what is going to be the mechanism that I have to limit myself to in order to be fair to the evidence. That was the really the biggest thing to me, is I wanted to be careful to not like allow spiritual influence and a lot of other things to kind of like seep in and influence my decision making. So I needed to limit myself to something that was well, it was rational. So that was kind of it. So what I did is that I actually decided to take the atheist position, which is, if I can't see it, taste it, touch it, smell it, observe it, demonstrate it, then it's not real. And that was kind of I was like, okay, let me take the harshest position and begin from there. And I think if I do that, then wherever I land is probably going to be at least as close as you're going to get from an accuracy perspective. And so I started there, and I said, all right, well, then if that's the case, I also need to start with no knowledge, like no knowledge of God or gods or conceptualizations of God. And so I kind of have to start in a vacuum. And so I literally like sat in my office, and I envisioned myself being a guy on a deserted island, the only human being in existence, with no access to any information, just observing the world around me. And I asked myself, I'm like, what conclusions might I come to about this? What questions might I ask myself, right? I'm the only human on the planet wandering around on this deserted island. What things might I wonder, once I get beyond kind of the fundamentals of how do I eat, how do I drink, just the basic stuff. Once I get past that, like, what are the questions I might ask myself? And that led me to the kind of realization. I was like, the thing that seems to be encoded in human DNA is three major questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? And where do we go when we die? And that basically became like my what I felt like was kind of like let's call it like one of the first keys, if you will, to how I need to think about this, because it's one of the only constants that I see across all cultures and creeds. Like we all have different ways that we've determined to answer those questions, but the underlying root of every religion, of every ideology, stems from those three questions. And I was like, if this is something that every human that we have any type of documentation of, if every human asks these questions, then it seems reasonable to me that this is something that's like hard coded into humanity. And,
Totally.
it's like maybe it's aliens, right? But whatever it is, it's in our DNA.
Yeah. When you first shared that with me, and I had shared with you, like, I come from a programming background, so I'm a software guy. And so every program has inputs and outputs, and
Right.
And within it is just a black box. And so it's like those three questions: what's going into life and what's coming after life? Those are the inputs and the outputs, and life is the thing, right? And you're trying to figure that out. So I love that.
Yeah. So that kind of became my, okay, these are the three questions that I'm going to ask. And so I was like, if I'm on a deserted island and I have no access to other information, what things might I conclude about all the things that I'm observing? And so I was like, so if I look around and I go, where did all of this come from? There's only two assumptions that I could potentially make. One is that it's always been here. That's one assumption. Or that it was made by something. And the reason I said that is that, or reason I thought that anyway, is that I can't observe something that is organized and highly functional, emerging out of something that is not organized and highly functional without an outside action. Like if I sit on the beach and I watch the sand long enough, I'm not going to see a crab materialize out of the sand and start walking around on the beach. That's not something that I can observe. But what I can observe is me going and cutting down trees and organizing things into something that is more complex than the raw materials that it started with. And so I was like, the only way that I could conclude that all of this that exists is that it either has always existed or it was created by something, because I can't observe anything else. And then the challenge I ran into there was, I was like, but the problem is I can't observe it having always been here, because I can't get outside of it having always been here, which leaves me with the quandary of, well, if I can't observe that, then I would have to, that's an assumption, that's not an observation. And so if I'm going to limit myself to only what's actually observable, what I realized is that the only thing I can actually observe is people or intelligences acting on things and those things being created. And so creation is observable, things having always been here or things evolving out of, these complex systems evolving out of simple systems. I can't observe that. That doesn't exist in nature, And so,
we don't have time on our side. We don't have infinite time.
Yeah, 100%, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, people would make the argument there. It's like, oh, well, we can look at all of this scientific evidence and everything else. I'm like, right, but that's not observation. That's evidence. That's different. And I could make the same argument for creation if I'm going to argue with evidence, not observation. And so I had to start with observation. And if I'm going to limit myself to observation, to be true to that, that meant that the only way that all of this can get here by pure observation is that somebody made it. That's the only way that you can get to rationally. So many people think, well, science is just following the facts. Right. That's not true. The facts. It was a fact at one point that the Earth is flat.
Right. Exactly. So science is a discovery mechanism. Right. And so that's what science is. Science is a theory, and then we go look for evidence that proves out the theory until we find out it no longer proves it. Right. Yep. And so science is a journey. It's not a set 100%. Of facts. Right.
Yeah. Well, the irony of it is that thing between I think that this might be true. What that is somebody is observing the evidence of a potential truth.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go take a whole bunch of actions to try and determine if the thing that they're observing, the evidence that they're looking at, what truth is it correlating to? And all of those acts that they take to try and determine what that is, that's faith.
Right. And they all have an aim, right? You right? You have to have an idea of what it is that we're going to research and what we're hoping to 100%. Find.
Yep, exactly. So it's like we what do we call that? It's in science it's called hypothesis, and in religion it's called faith, but it's really the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was kind of, that led me to, okay, creation to me, if I'm going to stay within the confines of the observable, I felt like creation was the most rational conclusion that one could come to for how everything came about. And, you know, I know the watch analogy is one that's hated by the atheists, but I still feel like it's valid. I mean, if I'm on a beach and I find a watch, you know, my thought isn't, hey, this must have materialized over thousands of years. My first thought is this must have been created by somebody.
Right. Yeah.
It's like sometimes the simplest answer really just is the best answer. And so to me, I just felt like, rationally speaking, the most rational position, if you're going to only go by what can be observed, not by what can be extrapolated by evidence, then creation really is the most rational conclusion. And so that kind of gave me the beginning point of, all right, then I think that there's pretty good evidence that there is some form of creative intelligence behind all of this stuff that exists. Now, again, could be aliens, right? Perfectly open to the possibility at that point in time that whatever, like, that this could be like a layered situation. You know, you could have a demigod that created the earth, and then there's like a bigger god that's outside of the demigod that rules the universe.
But it's a never-ending thing, right? Because then who created the demigod?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, it extrapolates out infinitely.
Yeah, it's like, okay,
so
we just kicked the can down the road. Yeah.
100%. I was like, so it's entirely possible that could be the case. And this is, again, like just expressing like where I was. My goal was I wanted to be open to anything. You know, I wanted to be open to the possibility that the planet was seeded by aliens, and that's what this whole thing was. You know, so I left open all the doors. You know, crazy hair guy on History Channel, he gets a seat at the table. You know.
Yep.
So,
love it. High in openness.
So,
yes,
100%. Yeah. You know, ironically, I took a one of those tests that like tests it's like a fractal for personality.
Yeah.
And on the openness and creativity, my fractal like was off the page.
You're off the charts. I knew that.
It was pretty funny. But yeah, so I'm like, all right, so creation, I've got that one, that's nailed down. Something made all this stuff. And so from there, I went through and I said, okay, let's stay within observation mode then. What can I observe about creators? You know, it's like if I'm going to work from just what's observable, then I have to work from what do I know about people that create things, you know? And so I started extrapolating out from there. I'm like, well, when I create things, I care about the thing that I created, you know? I'm not in necessarily the sense like, oh, I love it or I'm passionate about it, but I have a vested interest in it because I put a part of myself into that. And then I also recognize that nobody creates anything that does not carry markers of themselves. It's not possible. Like as a human being, you can't do that. Now, I recognize that I'm extrapolating God out of, you know, human, and that's not the right order to do it in. But you can't get there yet, right? Because we're still in just what I can observe, and so I have to extrapolate from pure observation, and I have to extrapolate what I can imagine about God from what he made, basically. And that was kind of the way I thought about it, was that seemed to be the most rational way to kind of walk down the path, you know?
I'm gonna stop you right there for a second, because you just said something that struck me so profoundly. You said, when I work on something, I put a part of myself into that.
Yeah.
That's literally what God has done to us.
100%.
He put a part of himself into us, right?
Right.
When he created us.
His image.
Yeah. Yep. It's like, oh my gosh,
right.
that is so true. And it's so profound. Anyway, I just had to jump in with that because that was good.
Yeah. No, man. I mean, his fingerprints are all over creation.
Yeah.
And you just can see that, which kind of led me to the next thing because I was like, all right, well, what can I extrapolate about this God that created everything? Which at that point I determined not to call it God, but to call it creator, because I didn't want to put any type of religious overtones on it. So I was staying very strict, even with myself and my own thinking. I'm like, okay, I can't call it God because that asserts a certain degree of interest in the creation that we haven't yet established. And so
Yeah.
we have to stay with creator. It's like, all right, so there's a creator. And what did that create? Like, has that creator revealed anything about itself? Is there anything that can be extrapolated about this creator from what it created? And so I started down the path. I'm like, well, I was like, this creator sucks because everything about this life sucks. I was like, death and murder and
Blasphemy.
all these things,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I was like, man, I was like, this is the worst creator ever, you know? And so I was like, but hold on. I was like, Dev, come on, let's be fair. Let's actually like,
Get
is
out the
there
whiteboard
anything?
eraser.
Yeah, right.
Let's start
Exactly. I'm
over.
like, is there anything good in creation? And
Yeah.
so I started thinking through, and I was like, man, like the times when I go and I hike, and I've been out in the mountains, and I've been away from people, I was like, the creation is pretty amazing. And I was like, in fact, I was like, really, like when I look at creation kind of seems to be almost like oriented around us. When I look at like the distance the sun is from the earth and the way that everything is orchestrated just on this planet feels like it was designed more for humanity than anything else. And as I started
Mm.
walking down that path, I had this realization. I was like, if you got rid of all the people, it'd actually not be too bad of a place. And so I was like, all right, so maybe the creator actually isn't the problem. It's the people that's the problem. And so that kind of started my path of going, okay, so it's like, all right, so let me not like assign good and bad to these things yet, because that's getting ahead of myself. Let me just start with what can be defined outside of my own biases, right? Because the good and bad, there's a degree to which you can prove good and bad, but for it to be good or bad, it has to be good or bad for someone. And so if you have a person there's a bias that has to be inherent in order to get to the good or bad part of that. And I was like, so let me back that out and say, let's set good and bad aside, and let's just look at what can be observed apart from good and bad. And I was like, so complexity, that is something that's definitely observable. Like whoever made this, like did some pretty crazy complex stuff. Like just the human eyeball is unreal. Like when you get into the levels of complexity, like even just the concept of how we don't actually see color,
Right.
Like we process it as color, but it's not actually color, which is a really weird thing to think about.
Just
you know and so I started kind of and I know I'm getting outside of my island at that point, and I recognize that, which was fine, because at that point I was like, all right, I don't need to be on the island anymore. Let's just go with like what we can observe. And so I stayed within my observation rubric, but I let myself get off the island for a little bit just to kind of get into complexity. And even on the island, I was like, if I just look at a crab and how complex the mechanics of that thing is just mind. And then ecosystems. If I want to stay on my island, I could observe ecosystems and the complexity of these ecosystems and how they all work together and just all of that. It tells me that this creator is extraordinarily detailed. Like the level of detail that this creator put into creation is wild. And I thought about it in terms of just, I've done like some drawing where, I'll draw to a certain point and then I'm just like, man, I'm too tired to put any more detail into this.
yeah.
It's like I've gone as far as I want to go with the detail. But in this creation, it's like, man, the level of detail is ridiculous. And it just and you start getting to microscopics or macroscopics, and you're just it's unreal. It just feels like it just goes on forever in whatever direction you want to go.
From the
you want to go scale
from the
out or
cosmos.
scale down.
Yeah. From the cosmos
Yeah.
to the quantum. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Man, that was great from the Cosmos Code. That's what I was looking for in my head, but I couldn't find it. You
Yeah.
nailed it. I love that. But yeah, so it's like, so I'm looking at that. I'm going, okay, so this creator is very detailed. And if he's detailed to that level, it seems reasonable to conclude that he has an interesting creation, or it has an interesting creation. And so that was kind of the next part that I came to, is I was like, all right, so for somebody to go through the level of effort that has clearly been gone to create all of this, and it seems like we're the center of whatever all of this is, then it stands to reason that they might have attempted to communicate with us, or to at least express their interest to us in some way. And at that point, I recognized that I was getting off my island a little bit, and beginning to extrapolate beyond what was observable. But I just felt like I was nearing the rational cliff, right? You know,
Mm.
the rational cliff says something created all this. Whatever created all this put a whole lot of effort into it, or at least a lot of detail. I can't say effort, because I don't know how difficult it was for them. Maybe it was no effort at all, but they certainly put a lot of detail into it in terms of like our understanding of detail. It's tremendously complex, and whatever put all this together is obscenely intelligent, at least in comparison to us. Like the level of intelligence comparative to our level of intelligence for what this creator made is light years beyond us. And so that was kind of like I think the end of my rational cliff, where I said, okay, at this point, this is demonstratable. Now we got to start getting a little outside of that, and making some assumptions based on that information. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that kind of led me to, all right, I wonder if this creator would have attempted to communicate with us. Is there any evidence to suggest that this creator might have tried to communicate with us? And so I started looking at like ancient religions, and just looking at just humanity in general. And what I noticed is that humanity across the board, from all the way back to the most ancient, as far back as we have any type of reference for, has been dealing with the concept of there being a creator, or a maker, or a god, or whatever, some controller of this whole system. And so that kind of gave me, again, just looking at it and saying, all right, it's not as clean as observing the creation directly, but it's definitely underpinnings of something. The fact, it's kind of like the big three, right? It's like the big three are there, and everybody's trying to answer the big three. And so I'm looking at, all the different expressions of trying to answer this in humanity, which kind of led me to, okay, it seems like at the very least, if the creator hasn't attempted to directly communicate with us, it at least put these three questions in us, which brought me to the conclusion. I'm like, if you're going to put the three questions in us, it seems silly that you wouldn't also seek to answer those three questions.
Mm.
It's like, why would you bake this into our DNA and then just float off into the ethereal? And so kind of going back into the level of complexity of creation paired up with those three questions kind of brought me to the place of saying, I feel like I can reasonably make the assumption that this creator is interested in answering the questions. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to put them there with all of the other complexity that exists. And so that then led me into, okay, how were they answered? And so obviously now we start getting into the sphere of religion, and people claiming to have been communicated to by the creator. And so now, once I started moving into that sphere, it's, again, had to make some base assumptions where I'm like, all right, I'm not going to prove one of these religions right. People have been
Mm.
debating over all these religions for thousands of years. I'm not going to prove one of them right. So once again, kind of coming with that base understanding that at some point I'm going to have to just pick one and see what happens, and that was kind of where my thinking was. is that, okay, if this creator has attempted to communicate with us, the odds that I'm the one guy who found the creator, after all these years, I'm the chosen one. I was like, that's stupid. I'm not going to allow myself to go down that path. So, let's stay within the framework of, if this creator has attempted to communicate, it probably happened a long, long time ago, and there's got to be some evidence for it. And so that took me to start looking at ancient religions. It's been like 20 years since I looked at this, so I'm very rusty on all of the stuff that I looked
That's
at.
okay. As you were talking, sorry to interrupt you again, but
you're good.
As you were talking, I'm like, man, you were like 19. I was trying to find somebody that would buy me beer. Like that was the level.
Yeah,
that was the level of thought process I was on.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out whether I should be finding someone to buy me beer at 19. So, I just started with some first principles. I was
that's funny.
A little further.
The other thing that struck me, just to derail you further, which I don't want to do, but it just struck me. I wrote down, the level of intelligence. And I was thinking about, what's the level of intelligence to create life? And it's like, it's really small, right? We don't need any. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which is a problem, right?
Yeah. Well, when you're given all the raw materials to do it. And,
he's made it so easy.
That's right.
If you're blessed to be able to do that. Some people have a hard time with that, but yeah.
100%.
But it doesn't require a lot of intelligence. Yeah.
No, it certainly does not. In fact, sometimes it requires, if you go by the claim of idiocracy, a lot of intelligence leads to a lot less people.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Oh man. But yeah, not to be derailed. So I'm sitting here processing, looking at all the different ancient religions, and basically I think what I noticed was that the vast majority of religions were derivative. That was kind of the big thing that I noticed. Like, if you really just scale it down, you go all the way back to the most ancient. You have Zoroastrianism. I think that's how you pronounce it. Which I think was a Sumerian religion, but I can't remember. And if it's not, the Sumerians had some form of ancient religion that is claimed to be very similar to Christianity. And so there's a lot of people that think Christianity was actually, or not Christianity, Judaism was actually derivative of whatever the Sumerian religion was. But there's some things that collapse in that, because the Sumerian one had a very different structure and belief system for the nature of God from the Judeo-Christian version. And so even though the creation stories have a lot of similarities, the Judeo version of it is, or Judaism version of it, is almost like a refute for the Sumerian version. And so anyway, so you're getting like really, really ancient. You've got whatever the Sumerian religion was. You got Zoroastrianism, which still exists. Actually, there's still people that practice this, which is fascinating. And then you have Judaism. There's paganism, which is kind of like the big open-ended, just whatever version of gods you believe in. And then there was one other. I can't remember the name of it. I want to say it's either Hinduism or it's something connected to Hinduism. It's also a pretty widely practiced one that still exists. So those were kind of it. Like, of all the ones that were there, I kind of kicked out Islam, because Islam and Christianity were derivative of Judaism, and so I felt like those were after effects, and so I just threw those out to start with, and so I looked at all of these different ancient religions, and basically what it came down to was I felt like whichever one had the most cohesive answer to the big three was probably going to be the most accurate, because I'm thinking, if this is baked into every human and this is the question, then the answer needs to be one that really gives a good cohesive answer to where did we come from, why are we here, and where do we go when we die. And so I looked at Zoroastrianism, and I really cannot remember what their explanation was, but I just felt like it was it fell short on at least one, if not two, of the big three. Same issue with Hinduism, same problem there. I think if I remember correctly, like some of their foundation is like the Earth is on the back of like a giant turtle, or
They got a lot of animals.
Yeah, some very interesting stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so this kind of feels like someone trying to explain something, not somebody revealing something that was given to them. And so I was like, all right, so that doesn't really work. And then I looked at paganism. Paganism was too disjointed. There was just no cohesion at all to like any of their ideologies, and so that didn't really work. And then the Sumerian one, that one was like a really weird one. It's like a weird version of paganism, where basically it's like there were a bunch of gods and they were fighting, and like a god blew up, and that's how the earth came to be. It's really crazy. So and so I was like, okay. I was like, well, that's it. Maybe, but I just don't. Again, it just kind of felt like it didn't have a good cohesive answer to those big three. And then I looked at Judaism, and I was like, Judaism, I feel like it really gives the most cohesive answer to all three. It's like, where did we come from? There was a creator, and that creator made us. And then where do we go when we die? We're here for a short period of time because we're essentially planted, and the intention is for us to grow up into whatever this thing is that the creator made us to grow up into, and so our time here is for the purpose of growing up into that thing. And so you get that with kind of the story of the wheat and the tares, which of course is a future state thing, but you can extrapolate that story from Old Testament. You don't have to go to New Testament to get that ideology. And so I went through that whole process, and basically I just settled on Judaism. I was like, of all the ones that I've read, I feel like this one is the most cohesive, and also it is the most rigidly and how would I say this? I felt like Judaism was like one of the most rigidly held in terms of like how well they preserved the narrative. Like that was another big thing. And then I also looked at like scale of practice too. There's a lot of ancient religions that existed, but none of them are practiced today. So I wanted to look at things that like are still practiced today. Judaism is still practiced today to some degree, even though obviously they've abandoned a lot of their foundations with animal sacrifice and stuff. But a lot of the core tenets of Judaism still practiced today. A lot of the core tenets of Hinduism still practiced today. A lot of the core tenets of paganism still practiced today. So I was like, okay, so these are still practiced, thousands and thousands of
Past
years
the test of time.
Their origin.
Yeah,
exactly. And so when I looked at it through that lens, I'm like, all right, these all make sense, but which one has the most cohesive answer to the big three? And that was truly the thing about what I saw in Judaism. I felt like the cohesion in the narrative, particularly in how it answers and ties together the big three, because the big three becomes sequential within that ideology. And I felt like, when you really put all that together, I was like, I think this one answers it the best. And so then that led me to Jesus, where it was like, all right, well, now we have a problem because Judaism isn't practiced in the way that it was previously practiced. And so I'm like, I found the one that answers the big three the best, but they stopped doing it. And I was like, well, crap, And so it's like, and so that means that the religion either broke and actually isn't what it was, what it looks like, or something else happened.
Somebody screwed it up.
So right, exactly. And so I was like,
Jesus, the man who screwed up Judaism. All right, there we go.
That's it. Yeah. Hey, you heard it here first.
Yeah, there we go.
So I'm like, all right, well, so let me go look at Jesus now. And so I went and I started looking at, where, like, how do I figure out, like, how do I even begin this path, basically? Because that was kind of what it came down to. Because, you hear all the arguments like Jesus didn't even exist, and you hear all these crazy stories. And I started looking into some of that stuff. And this was before, like, we had the internet like we do now. So, even then we had internet, but not to the degree that we do today. And so, So I had limited on my resources, but I started looking through and I was like, has anyone gone and done this research? And so I found Case for Christ, and I was like, you know what, this makes sense. This is a guy who he was an atheist, he was a reporter, or a what do you call that? And it's a special type of journalist, investigative journalist. There you go.
Yeah.
And so, I felt like after looking into his credentials and his story, I was like, all right, this seems like a good starting point. Let's go there. And so I read his book, and I felt like he made a compelling case. And so, I got to the end of that, and I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, so this is a pretty good case, kind of answers all the major questions. And then really what honestly sold me, though, was when I sat down and I started looking at Jesus in the context of other people who've lived in history, because that was kind of the big thing to me. I was like, lots of people have claimed to be God throughout the course of human history. So why is Jesus any different from everybody else? And as I started looking at that, I was like, all right, is it recency bias? I mean, it's only been 2,000 years since his death. There's people that lived before him that probably claim to be God, and maybe we're just experiencing recency bias, and so I started kind of thinking about it through that lens. But what I realized was the thing that made Jesus completely distinct from any other person that I could find in human history is the ripple effect. So the way I thought about it was, I imagined history as like a lake. And if you throw a rock in a pond, it sends out ripples. And so every human being that's born is like a rock being thrown in that pond, and they send ripples out. And the larger the impact of the person's life, the further those ripples go out. But they all eventually die out. Right? The ripples all at some point in time start to fade. Julius Caesar, like people still are impacted by the things that he did, but the ripples have a clear end. Like there's a clear stopping point where his ripples ended, and now it's somebody else has picked it up and carried it on. Right? They've carried the legacy on. Jesus, on the other hand, was a weird figure, because it's like when I started looking, it seemed like he just kind of pops up throughout history in just various places, and the ripples just restart again. And people can make the claim that it's like, well, no, it's his followers that cause that. I'm like, but I don't think so. Like you can't, like the levels of like you look at some of the reformations within Christianity. You had Catholicism, and then the break from Catholicism that led to or like the Great Awakening, and some of these revivals that have occurred. Like these are not a person who was one of Jesus's original followers just perpetuating the narrative. This is like the ripples died down for a moment, and then all of a sudden they just explode again. Like what can cause that? And I couldn't find anywhere else in history where I found that type of effect happening in the level of demonstration that you see with Jesus. And so that ultimately was the thing that kind of pushed me over the edge, where I was like, okay, Judaism, I feel good about that one. Case for Christ, he makes a compelling case for the fact that he definitely existed. He definitely died on a cross. You can't get around the fact that he made some pretty insane claims. And so either he was absolutely nuts, or he was who he says he was. And the things that he teaches are too cohesive for a crazy person. And so it's like and again, I mean, Lee Strobel did a great job. He had psychologists review and psychiatrists review, and it's like he doesn't have any of the markers of a crazy person, other than just what he said. It's like, so either he was crazy or he was God. And so then I took that and I paired that with the ripples, and that kind of came to the conclusion. I said, all right, based on the evidence, I feel like what I'm seeing here is, I feel like I'm seeing the evidence of a truth that is beyond what is observable. And I just realized, like, this is the moment. This is where you end, where you can go with pure evidence, and now we have to move into the experiential, which was basically the way I saw it. Was that I just kind of recognized, I'm like, all right, the evidence has brought me this far, but now I'm going to have to move into the experiential. level where I'm going to have to almost like throw a rock out into the spiritual realm and see if something comes back. I kind of felt like I was dealing with aliens at that point, where it's like I'm going to send a signal out into the universe, and then we'll just see if something comes back. And my thought process was, I was like, if the spiritual realm works anything like like communication, if I send a signal out with a very specific marker, then whoever it is on the other side should recognize it when somebody is trying to make contact.
Like Hunt for Red October. One ping.
Right.
Yes.
That's right. With your particular radio station, I'm
Just
thinking,
one
if I
ping.
tune it.
Yeah.
That's it. Just one ping. You got it, man. So that was kind of the beginning of that journey. And then to sort of wrap up how that ended, basically I spent the next year reading my Bible and fasting and praying. And the way I kind of did it is I said, okay, I was like, God, if you exist, because at this point I am not convinced in the sense of I have knowledge that you exist. I'm recognizing that the evidence points to your existence, and the evidence points to Jesus being the person that he says he is. And that was kind of my starting point. I said, but evidence is not truth. Evidence is just evidence. It's pointing to something, but it's not, it in and of itself is not the truth. And I said, so where I am today is I am choosing to believe the evidence. And as a result of that, my anticipation is that if I act on the things that you have said, then if you exist, you're going to respond. And because of the fact that we're dealing with like literally eternity and the magnitude of the quest that I was undertaking, my expectation was not that like God's just going to respond to me immediately, because I'm looking at this and going, if that's my expectation, then I'm really shortchanging the magnitude of the undertaking that I'm trying to undertake here. Like that, it would be silly for me to think that I'm just going to go, all right, God, I'm going to do the thing, and you just need to respond to me immediately and prove that you exist. It's like if something made all of this, like my position has to be one of the learner, not the evaluator, and I have to come into it with a degree of humility. If such a being truly does exist, I don't get to come at it from a place of moral high ground or a place of intellectual high ground or demands. I have to come at it from a place of humility and recognition of the absolute superiority of this being that I'm dealing with. Because truly that is the only rational conclusion one could come to. It's like you can't. It's like I love the people that try to make the argument. It's like, well, if that God exists, I would never serve him because he's a horrible God. And I'm like, if that God exists, you don't have the moral high ground. Like you can't have it both ways. If there's a God that created all of this, then your comprehension of morality is derivative. You don't get to claim the moral high ground over the being that made all this if he actually exists. Like
that's
those
good.
two things don't work together, bro. And so
that darn logic.
That was kind of so that was kind of the understanding I started with. And so that's what I did for the next year. I read my Bible, I fasted, I prayed, I to the best of my ability, I applied everything that I saw in Scripture, and truly nothing like profound happened. I did have some kind of weird experiences, like my hands got really hot while I was praying one time, like super hot, like it felt like there was like literally like power coming out of my hands, which sounds weird, but that was just the experience that I had, and I didn't know what to make of it, and so I didn't make anything of it. And I ended up writing in tongues, which I didn't know what it was at the time. I was just writing, and
interesting.
And I could hear the language in my head, but I didn't want to. I like started to speak it, but I was writing at the time, so I just wrote it instead of spoke it, and didn't understand what it was until almost like 2-3 years later, because I grew up in cessationalist teaching, and so my whole background was non-charismatic, like at all. I'd never even seen anybody speak in tongues or pretend to speak in tongues. So, so a lot of pretenders out there. So I'd never even seen that before. So I had no frame of reference for it. And so I'm like having all these kind of weird experiences.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never seen it written before. I've heard it.
Yeah, it was a very peculiar experience. And so, but I'm kind of just going down the path, and it wasn't until a year later that I actually finally had that experience where God actually spoke to me for the first time, and I heard the Holy Spirit, and I felt his peace and his power. And it was the first moment where it wasn't audible, but it was communicative, I guess would be the best way I could put it. Like, up to that point, it felt like me reading about God and maybe encountering his presence, but there was no communication coming the other way. A year later, probably almost to the day, it was the first time that I actually experienced like the communication side of it, where I felt the Spirit, and I also understood what he was saying to me. And when I understood it in my own tongue, and I was like, whoa, and it was like, that was the moment. And then from there, that began like a whole crazy journey that we talked about, and everything that happened after that. But yeah, that was my very rational journey to faith.
That is wild. Yeah, that is not your typical coming to the faith story. So, but so powerful, and I think can speak to a lot of people who have questions, right? And especially those with a heavy logic brain.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, the interesting thing is that even now, like, I have absolute confidence in the Lord, and my life is one that is led by the Spirit and is led by faith. But it's like at a rational level, whenever I step back into my rational or logic brain, if you want, I still allow myself to retain the possibility that I'm a crazy person and I've lost my mind. Because that's the thing. It's like, to be intellectually honest, that's where we have to live. And I think that's the thing. Like, within my intellect, that has to be a possibility, but I don't live out of my intellect anymore. I live out of my spirit, and that's where the difference, I think the difference maker really lies.
Well, that's a good segue to Christ's story, because when he came, there were kind of three groups of people that he had a problem with.
Yeah,
the religious, the intellects, and the lawyers.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And right now, because of the amount of access to information that people have today, we're getting people with the trifecta.
Yeah. Very good. Awesome. Well, you've said before, faith is a bridge between evidence and knowledge. I really liked that. So kind of unpack that, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of times people miscategorize faith as being this kind of blind belief that's not based on anything, and that really is a poor categorization, because the word faith in and of itself has no religious underpinnings. It's actually basically the same word as trust. If you were to look at the Greek, the word for faith and the word for trust are effectively the same thing. So faith has taken on religious underpinnings because of its use, but the word in and of itself is, like, I would say, I have faith that my car is going to get me to work tomorrow. I have faith that the sun's going to come up tomorrow. That's based on a whole lot of experiences of the sun continuing to come up and my car continuing to get me to work tomorrow. And so faith is not something that's just like arbitrary or ungrounded hope that something is true. And if it is, then it's not faith, right? Yeah. Like, that's the reality. Like, if somebody is saying, I have faith, but it's not grounded in any type of experiential evidence, they don't have faith, they have hope. They might have belief, but it's not faith. It's not the same thing. And so I think that's the first thing to really clarify. And the way I kind of think about it is like this. Truth is the thing that exists apart from us.
Yep.
right? Truth is the thing that we're all observing. And then there's knowledge, which is the thing that I have. Knowledge is I have experienced something, and through that experience, I now have a certain degree of understanding about whatever that thing is. That's the part that I now own, which is knowledge. And so, knowledge of the truth would mean that I have experienced a portion of a truth, which has now given me knowledge of that truth. And so the question becomes, what is the gap between knowledge and truth? Right. I know certain things, but I also recognize there are truths that I don't know, or aspects of truth that I've not yet experienced. And so I don't know it. I may have beliefs about it. I may have assumptions about it, but I don't know it. I just have what I believe or assume about it because I've not yet experienced it. And so so there's this gap that exists between those two things. And I like to call it faith because and maybe a better way to contextualize that is faith is when you engage that gap. The gap is just a gap. But faith is when you engage that gap, is where you say, okay, I recognize there's something there. There's evidence that something is there, but I don't have knowledge of what it is because I've not yet experienced it. And so I'm going to pursue it as if it is there.
Perfect.
That's faith.
That's why faith without works is dead, right? You
100%.
have to take that step.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you have to take that step, and that's it. I mean, I think that's
good.
Yeah, I think that's the best way I'd explain that.
How do you explain faith to guys that think Christianity just means checking your brain at the door?
I usually don't, to be honest. Because guys that take that perspective they're not interested in truth. They've already come to a resolution of what they believe, and usually people that make those kinds of statements, they're making those statements because that's their clever quip to just move on, essentially. And so if somebody has that statement, I usually look at that and say, okay, cool, well, great. What do you want me to say? You know what I mean? Like, outside of the Lord, like, prompting me to engage in conversation with that person, I just don't go out of my way to have those conversations because it's not an intellectually honest conversation at that point.
Yeah.
Now, if a person is of that opinion, but they're trying to understand, like they're saying, look, like, this is how I think about it. I think about it as you're checking your brain at the door. But tell me, like,
so you're looking at the motivation. Are you?
Yeah, 100%.
What's the motivation behind your statements? Yeah.
That's right. It's like, if you want to have a conversation, then cool. I'm always about having a conversation. But if you're just trying to, be a jerk, I don't need to engage that. You know what I mean?
I think that's really good. I think that's helpful for people that are, trying to figure out how to share their faith with others, and we don't force our way, right? It's an invitation, and
100%.
If they're curious, then you have a response, and you've spent an hour giving us very rational reasons why Christianity is, a rational decision.
Yeah. So I think it's funny. I think what I would say, if I were being snarky, is when somebody makes that statement that, Christianity is just checking your brain at the door, I would say, you're right. In fact, scripture actually says exactly that, because your rational mind does not have the ability to comprehend spiritual things. And so you're exactly right. You do need to check your natural mind
actually
at
true.
the door if you want to understand spiritual things.
Yeah.
And so I would just agree with them. Yeah, you're 100% right. Now, if you want to actually understand that, then, we can talk about it. But
I will agree. The conscious mind does not, right? The power of the subconscious mind is mind-boggling. Like, go ahead and make your heart beat and get your breathing regular, right? It's like all of that happens automatically, right? How does that happen? That's all subconscious.
Right. Yeah.
All right, let's turn the corner here. And I just want to talk a little bit about, now you're not just believing, but you're preaching on the street, like I'm calling it, online.
Yeah.
What sparked that?
Streets.
Yeah. Tell us the story behind, your TikTok adventure. You got a video with 400,000 views. And you created this thing called the Quiet Church. Like, walk me through that.
So man, I've been in and out of ministry for the better part of 20 years. Never formally, but I've discipled people, I've baptized people. I've had a lot of just really crazy experiences. But my life has been this very strange weaving of business has been kind of my vocation, but ministry has kind of been my life. And there's been this very odd interweaving where there were times where my vocational life was just almost shut down for periods of time where I was ministering but not vocationally, and then that would just get mostly shut down, and then my vocation in business would become the dominant force, even though there was still like a heavy weaving of ministry and discipling people and things like that, and almost to the point where it became frustrating, where I was like, Lord, like, would you make up your mind, like, which one are we doing here, and so last year, 2024, a business that we went through it was a cataclysmic industry event, basically. The industry I was in had a once in U.S. history moment happen in 2024, and it wiped out our business, and it wiped us out financially. Like, I mean, we were completely destroyed. Both personally and professionally. And so, I turned 40 in July of last year. I woke up on my 40th birthday. The Lord told me it's time to start preaching. It was I've had a few moments where it was audible or almost audible, basically, where like I rolled out of bed and I like heard the Lord. And it's only happened maybe twice or three times in my whole life. And that was one of them, where I was like, I rolled out of bed and it was like, hey, Dev, it's time to start preaching. And I was like, okay. What does that mean? And so, and at that point, the business was near dead, but not dead yet. And so I was still kind of in like a weird spot where, I was still fighting for it, because I felt like I had that responsibility to my investor. And I also felt like the Lord told me, it's not yours to call, basically. It's the investors to call. When he calls it, that's when it's done. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Then I have to show up every day and fight like we're going to find a way to get there, and so that was kind of the mode I was in when I got that word. And so I started the process of trying to put together my first sermon. And man, I would get like 20, 30 pages deep. And, I was like, I can't preach on any of what I wrote here, because I'm still going down the rabbit hole. I haven't even made a point yet. And what it felt like is like, I had the idea, I knew what I wanted to communicate. But when I went to try and add the framework to communicate the thing I needed to communicate, it's like the framework just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm like, man, by the time I'm done, I'm gonna have to like write a whole book to explain the framework that's
boiled the
necessary,
ocean,
just to understand this like one concept I'm trying to explain. And this went on for like 6 months. I think it was like almost December before
30 pages of framing.
Oh, it was ridiculous. And, so I'm like, I think it's like December now. The business is completely collapsed. Like, we're on the verge of getting evicted. I mean, it was bad. And I was just like walking or praying or something. And the Lord was like, he basically just told me, he said, Devin, stop trying to write sermons. Just open your mouth and start talking, and I will put word there. And I was like, okay, fine. And so I pulled out my phone and I just made a TikTok video and just literally just started talking. Like, it was, just was like, this is where I'm at. This is what the Lord's showing me, whatever it was. And it got like 5,000 views, which isn't a ton of views, but like comparative,
that's pretty good.
Up to that point, like all of my videos were like 100, maybe 200 views, nothing got traction. It got like 5,000 views in like 2 days. And so it was just kind of this weird moment where I was like, all right, fine, I get it, and so that began that process of really just getting on and just saying whatever it was I felt like the Lord was telling me to say, And so I started there, and still very much in the thick of like everything that was happening with the business shutting down and getting sued and just all the stuff that was
lots of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it was not a good experience. I would say my last 2 years have been the worst 2 years of my entire life,
Mm.
which is saying something because you know my story.
So, so
So
many
yeah,
lessons.
yeah.
I've been
So
down
this
these
will.
paths before. So that's why I'm smiling and why we have a kinship. Yes.
Yeah, no, it was rough, but it was interesting, And so through all of that, I just kept preaching, I kept getting on and making these videos and just doing whatever the Lord like put on my heart to do. I think around maybe February, so like January, we went through getting evicted and just all the stuff that happened with that, which was hilarious because like I'm sitting here like moving into this other place and I'm like sitting on my stairs making videos in between going back to the other house to get stuff while I'm waiting for like court. And I mean, it was
So
crazy,
nuts.
So
Who am
yeah,
I
so
to
I'm like
do
sitting
this
here,
video? Let's talk about
dude,
success. Let me
dude,
tell you how to
yeah,
succeed in life. Yeah. The Lord has a
yeah.
tremendous sense of humor. Oh
Oh, it
my,
was it was wild, man.
yeah,
But yeah, so I
that's
was
it.
just kind of in the thick of it, and then February
But you knew
came,
the word.
and
Yeah.
I did, yeah. And but yeah, so February rolled around and then I started doing I started fooling around with TikTok Live in I think like January, February.
Mm.
Just kind of messing with it, trying to figure out like how it works. And I started finding that like when I got on it started out with just Q&A. I was just trying to like jump on and do like live Q&A and just answer questions.
Yeah.
And I found that in doing that, like a lot of people were like, we've never heard anything like this before. Like, please do more of this. And
Yeah.
so then I started doing a Tuesday night where I was like, all right, let me just like pick a time and I'll just get on and do live Q&A. And so I started doing that on Tuesday nights. And then that led into people asking me to actually teach. And so I was like, all right, well, let me just put together, it's like this is maybe is a good forum to do some like larger stuff because I started dealing with like cessation and once saved, always saved, and like bigger questions that I just didn't feel like I could answer in like a 20-minute TikTok video. And so I started doing like bigger concepts. And then that really kind of just took a life of its own, where I was just started doing every Tuesday night, doing like just a Tuesday night live basically. And then around, I want to say it was like March or April, maybe June. Yeah, June is when it was. So June rolled around, and you got to understand, like during all of this, like every month we're coming to the end of the month and almost getting evicted from the apartments that we ended up moving to, and like the car is getting threatened to be repossessed. I mean, it's like every single month we're coming to the end of the month, like almost getting stuff shut off or taken or whatever. And I would have like these consulting clients that would come up, and it seemed like it was going to be great, and then they would just evaporate, overnight, and it's like suddenly my income stream is devastated again, and it's just like, just ridiculous stuff. And I'm going like, Lord, like, are we gonna do like a blended thing here? Are we doing like am I doing like tent making and ministry? Am I full-time ministry? Like, which one are we doing?
Which Bible story am I? Am I Job?
Yeah,
No, please not
dude,
Job.
right? Jeez. Yeah. It's so funny. People are like, "Oh man!" Like every time I hear your story, it's like I think of Job. I'm like, dude, don't think of Job. I haven't gone through anything close
That
to
is so
what Job went through.
that's why
Not even.
we're grateful,
Do
even in our
do
demise.
not compare me to Job. It's not even close
That's
to
why
what Job went through.
that's why they stuck that in
So
there so we could be grateful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm telling you, man. Yeah, there's no doubt. It's like you got two scriptures, Job, and you've not resisted temptation to the point of sweating your own blood. You
Right,
put
right.
those
There you
two
go. Yeah.
together, like that. That's your gratefulness ones.
I lived on
Um,
James 1:4-7. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
No, consider it pure joy. There we go.
Oh yeah, but yeah. So I'm like I'm in the midst of all this, and then I think around it was like it was around May. I started getting all these like crazy opportunities for like high level, high paying positions, and started going through like interview process, and it seemed like one of these was gonna pop, and I'm like, okay, I guess maybe this was a cycle again, where I'm gonna go back into business. But I did have like a clear understanding though, like the Lord made it abundantly clear. He's like, look, he's like, no matter what you do next, like if you go back into business or if I take you somewhere else, this is your focus. Like I want you to preach. And I was like, okay, fine. So, it's like maybe you were just trying to get me grounded in this thing before we go back into business again and make sure I don't don't like get like lost in business, you know? And so I went through, and then at the beginning of June or end of May, all of the opportunities just bombed, like for no good reason. Like they were all, it was crazy, you know, under any other circumstances, I would have been hired, and all three of them turned me down. Even after having phenomenal interviews, I even had one of them tell me, she's like, listen, under any other circumstances in the world, I would hire you in a heartbeat for this role. She's like, it's literally just because this specific role, I need somebody from the specific industry that I'm in. She's like, if it was any other circumstances, you'd be the guy, you know? And so it's like that level of just specificity where I'm like, really? Like, come on, man. And so, you know, June hits and I just went into like a deep depression. I did my Tuesday nights, and I think I made like 2 videos the entire month of June because I was just so depressed. And I was kind of all done. I was like, Lord, I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore. I was like, just kill me. Like, I went full Jonah at that point. I'm like, I'm so angry. I could die. Just kill me. I'm done, you know? And so I think, around the end of June, I had this moment where I was out walking and I stumbled upon this path that was over by my house, and I realized that this path is like a prayer walk basically. So there's a church right next to our apartments, and the church owns this like gigantic hill. I mean, it's practically a mountain. It's big enough, you know, and it has a hiking trail that's about 1.5 miles, 2 miles long, and they have these little signposts with scripture about every 400 yards as you like walk through the trail in the woods. And so I stumbled upon it because the construction for the apartments had like torn up the land in that area, and it opened up the path. And so I saw the path there, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what that is. And so I went walking and discovered there's this whole hiking trail, and it like lets out at this cross that's on the side of the hill that like overlooks, you know, a large portion of San Antonio. And so I realized, I was like, all right, man, I need to just like go pray there in the morning. Like, that's what I got to do, you know. And up to that point, I'd been sleeping basically till my daughter woke up. You know, I'd stay up till like 2 a.m. and then wake up at like 8:30. And I was just in a cycle of just doing that over and over again every day because I just couldn't. I was so depressed, like I just could not bring myself to wake up, you know. And honestly, I'd been fighting that depression for like probably 7, 8 months, but it had like really like landed hard in June. And so July rolls around, and I finally I was like, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go pray at like 7 a.m. before my daughter wakes up. That's what I'm going to do. And I would try to do it, and then she would stay up all night the night before, or somebody would get sick. It was like every obstacle in the world. And so after like 2 weeks of trying to go do this, like finally one morning, it was like everything aligned, and I was like, yes, I have the energy. Okay, I'm going to go do it. And so I went, I met with the Lord, man. It was so powerful, and like such a moment of refreshing that it was like, I didn't have a lot of energy, but I touched something that I was like, that right there. I know that feeling. I've had that before, right? Like that grace is there. And it was like there was just enough grace to start. And so starting in July, I just was, man, it was like, I was like, okay, I'm going to start making stuff like every day. I'm going to start really pushing this. And so I started down that path, and then, and it was kind of weird. It was like a whole bunch of stuff like kind of collided all at one time. But it was like the grace was there, and I started, you know, finding my way out of the depression, and I started making, you know, 4 or 5 videos a day. And just, you know, it was like every day, like I would get up in the morning, I'd go do my prayer time. I'd make 1 to 2 videos there. And then as soon as my wife got home from work, I'd go out and I'd walk for like 2-3 hours, and I'd make like 3 to 5 videos there. And so I just started doing that like literally every single day. Everywhere I could squeeze out time to go walk, I would go make videos. And so as I did this, it just, something happened, and like one of my videos caught fire. It went to like 400 something thousand, you know, views within a span of a week. I had another video that went semi-viral like that, went to like 100,000 views. And so all of this was like kind of colliding at one time, and then my account ended up like just grow. Like I was at like 2 or 3 thousand followers, and I grew to like 10,000 followers in a span of like a week and a half. And then I suddenly had people start reaching out to me that were like, "Hey, we want to support what you're doing," and it was like, okay, And I think it was probably around March, I think, that I renamed it the Quiet Church. That was because I was under my own personal name, and I realized I was like, I don't want the ministry, like I don't want this to be personality based. I don't want this to be about me.
Yeah.
So I started praying on like what the Lord wanted to do with that, and He said, call it the Quiet Church, and I was like, that's a cool sounding name, but I don't have any idea what it means. I was like, because I come from branding, so I'm like, all right, how do you brand that? The Quiet Church, like, what does that to do with? I was like, it sounds really good.
The still small voice. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. No, and that was ultimately what I came to. I was like, okay, maybe that's what this is about, know? And but even when I named it, to be honest, like I understood what it was correlated to, but I was like, I still don't quite know how to brand that. Like, what does that pertain to? It's like, it's the still small voice. Okay, cool. But what does that mean? Like beyond just
foolishness to the world. That's what it means. It looks like foolishness to the world. Yes.
Right. Dude, it felt like it. And so I renamed it then, but I still hadn't done a lot with it.
Yeah.
And then right around July, it like everything kind of culminated during that 30-day period. I had this one guy reach out. I thought he was insane, to be honest, because he was sending me all these crazy messages about like how I had like changed his life, and he's like, you don't even understand. Like, he's like, dude, I need to support you and all this other stuff, and I'm like, all right, bro, it's cool, like relax, but then I ended up talking to him, and he's this amazing like Peter like guy,
Oh, wow.
And so he's that personality, and so now he's actually like a really good friend of mine now. And it's just been just an unbelievable support. I mean, he's like almost single-handedly supported this ministry for like the last 2 months.
Awesome.
And so it's just been this amazing relationship that happened there. And then I was talking to the Lord again, and I'm like, all right, Lord, like all this is blowing up now, but I don't want to take that to mean like this is what it is. So like, I need you to tell me, like, do you want me to really do this full time? Like, is that what you're trying to tell me? And I was like, I need like a definitive sign that this is what it is. And so I get a call like 48 hours later from a pastor friend of mine I hadn't talked to in months. And he's like, hey, why haven't you like formalized your ministry? And I was like, I don't know. Mostly because I don't have the money, but So I was like, but I was like, I guess that's probably the biggest reason. And he's like, I think you should probably think about that. And then I get a call the next day from a close friend of mine that's also really good friends with this pastor. Like they communicate like very regularly. And he's like, dude, why haven't you formalized your ministry? I've been thinking about like giving to it. He's like, but it just didn't feel right. Like just giving money to you. He's like, I felt like you need to like formalize it first. And I was like, did you talk to Joe? And he was like, no. He's like, why? I was like, really weird that both of you called me in like 48 hours telling me I should formalize my ministry. And so I was like, well, dude, I don't have the money. That's why. And he's like, well, go formalize it and I'll pay for it. And I was like, well, I mean, I guess I can't argue with that. So I filed for the incorporation papers, and I actually just got the all the documentation back like yesterday. So like this is all very fresh. So I just finished the filing for the Quiet Church. I just updated the Quiet Church website now and got the PayPal set up and all that stuff, so people can now actually like support like legitimately instead of all sketchy like sending me money through quick Cash App, So but yeah, man, like that's kind of how it came about, and that's now awesome. It's like it's really kind of taken on a life of its own. I ended up preaching on Zoom to 100 people in Africa, which was just a crazy experience. And then I actually had the same guy that I did that preaching for. He actually just asked me to come to Africa and actually preach to them live, potentially in December. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, man, that's kind of
That's
how
awesome.
I got here. Yeah, I get people ask me all the time. They're like, are you a pastor or whatever? I'm like, nope, definitely not a pastor. That is not my calling. Maybe apostolic, maybe preacher. That's not quite it's not quite in the fivefold, but it's I'm
Teacher.
probably
Yeah.
yeah, I'm somewhere in there. I'm here to spread the word. That's what I'm doing. And
Oh,
so yeah, man, that's how it came about.
that is awesome. Well, I'm super excited that you've got your incorporation now. You've got that going.
We're legit.
The
We
Quiet
exist.
Church.
We're real. We're a real thing.
And while we're at it, the website is the Quiet Church,
.org.
thequietchurch.org.
Nope, just thequietchurch.org.
Thequietchurch.org. All right.
Yeah, technically maybe not but yeah.
the, thee and thou. All right.
Thou Quiet Church.
Yeah.
That'd be funny.
All right. So here we are in dad mode. Let's talk faith and fatherhood. You got 3 kids at home.
Yep.
How has your walk with Jesus impacted your parenting?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I'll tell you, there was a distinct moment. Well, actually, before I do that, I should qualify some things. So my journey into dadhood is probably different than most. Most people that I talk to, they either wanted kids, and so they were like very excited about having kids, and it was very intentional, or they got pregnant and it was like by accident,
Yeah.
But there's not much in between in most people that I meet. As usual, I'm the odd man out here. I was neither. I didn't have like a burning desire to have kids. I kind of just had like this understanding that I was going to have kids, and that wasn't from a young age. That actually came after I got married. When I was much younger, I was like, yeah, I don't want kids at all. But, I went to Walmart at like midnight, and I was like, nope, never, no, thank you.
I've seen,
and I don't need any of that.
I do not. I don't need it.
Yeah, but after I got married, though, I just had kind of this understanding that this was part of the path, and there was a part of me that felt like having kids was necessary to become the person that I needed to become, which is kind of an odd thing, I think, to think, but that was my thinking anyway.
Yeah.
And so when the time came to have kids, it was intentional, but there wasn't like this excitement about it. In fact, honestly, I had quite a bit of trepidation, but I understood that I needed to do it, and so I was committed to it, even though it was like, I don't really know what to expect from this, which I didn't have like younger siblings. I didn't, my parents were much older. And so most of their friends were also older. And so I didn't grow up around like little kids.
Okay.
And so I had very little context for like young children being a part of like the family. Like that just was not something I had a lot of context for. And so when we had our first, it was, I didn't really have any expectations or thoughts about how I was going to do it. I think the only kind of core things I think I kind of understood early. One of them was I wanted my kids to know me. I didn't feel like I knew my dad. Like he was a great man. A lot of issues in the fathering side of things. Not that he, and how would I say this? Because I got to be fair to him. It's not that he wasn't a good father. It's that he was a better father figure than he was a father, if that makes sense. And so I felt like, it's like I felt like I knew more about him through the people that knew him than I did from him.
Didn't have the relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, and I found out, how he felt about me through everybody else, because it just seemed like everyone was like, your father like speaks so highly of you. I was like, man, like you would not know it with the way that he yells at me about the things that he disagrees with me on,
Yeah.
And so So we just had a very weird relationship in that way, and so that was one of the things that I resolved early on, was that I wanted my kids to know me, failures and all. I wanted to make sure that like who I was and who they saw was me, and so I didn't try to like restrain using bad language, because I had a fairly foul mouth after living in Rhode Island, East Coast for a little while. It draws it out.
It's part of the package.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's like, so there were things like that, and like just being like seeing who I am like raw. Like I never tried to I never tried to censor myself in front of my kids. I wanted them to see me grow, and for better or worse, that was how I went about it. And I also wanted to have a relationship with them, so I made a concentrated effort, as best as I possibly could, to have a relationship with them. And so those were kind of like the fundamentals, and the rest of it, I just kind of sorted it out as I went. Now, what was interesting was there was a pivotal moment before we had kids, that I think in a lot of ways very much shaped how I thought about my kids early. And that was when my parents passed. So after my parents passed, we were living in Kansas City. We hadn't gotten pregnant yet, so we didn't have any kids at this point. And so I was actually at their house in Texas, and there was a comet going over strangely. And it had, it was like one of those comets like in the sky for like weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so this comet had been, in the sky
every
for
50 years, long. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the comet had been in the sky for like the whole time, from the point that they had died all the way up until kind of like the closure of getting out of all the stuff out of the house and everything else. And so we were at like the end of that comet's session, if you will. And I was standing in my garage. I had like walked outside and I'd looked at it, and it kind of felt like their presence was almost like waning with that comet. And so as I was standing in the garage, I told the Lord, I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't have parents anymore, like I don't have a dad anymore. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And what I felt like the Spirit told me in that moment is he said, Dev, you don't understand. And I was like, what do you mean I don't understand? He said, those aren't your parents. And I was like, what? And he was like, they were stewards. Their job was to steward your life until it was time for you to meet your true father. And he said, they did that. They stewarded your life well, and the time has now come for you to walk with me. And he said, so they're done. They don't need to be here anymore. And that completely recontextualized the way I understood the parent-child relationship in that moment. And so when my kids were born, the whole way I thought about it, I didn't have the same attachment, I think, that a lot of people have, because I didn't think about them as like a part of me, and there's like a lot of like baggage that can come with that, that I just didn't have, because my whole thought process was, okay, I'm a steward of their life until it's time for them to meet their true father. And that's a gift and a blessing, and and it's not in any way to diminish that gift and that blessing. It just recontextualized the way I thought about it. With that, there are also some personality traits too with me. Like, I never wanted my kids to be like me, like that was a big thing for me. Is like, I want my kids to be like them, because I'm me. I'm very much an individualist. I'm just who I am, I'm not trying to be like anybody else. And I didn't want my kids to try to be like me. I wanted them to try to be like them.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, so I think all of those things kind of framed my parenting from an early
that's really
going.
good. The stewarding concept is super powerful, because I think, so many parents live for their children. Of course, you love your children, but to recognize that our job is to raise them up so they can go.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
so they meet their real father.
Yeah, that's
like
so
that's
good.
that's the thing, right? Like, my connection to them is a wonderful thing that we get to play out in this like natural sphere.
Yeah.
But in the spirit, like the goal is for the version of them that is associated to me to die, and then for a new version to be born again that is connected to him. And that's what's supposed to happen. And
Yeah.
so, the connection that we have is at least in this natural plane, it's a temporary theater for us to play out that process for them to meet their real father.
I know parents that struggle, and we went through some tough times with some of our kids, and one of the things that really helped us is recognizing that, yes, you love your children, but he loves them more.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
I did a video on that the other day.
It's not all on you.
That's right. That's right. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. I remember when I realized that, it was like the Lord showed me. He's like, he actually asked me. I said, "Do you really think you love your kids more than me?"
All right.
He's like, he said, "I just want you to stop and think about that for a minute." He's like, "Do you really think you love them more than me?" He's like, "Do you think you even have the capacity to love them more than me?" And I was just like, dang. It's like, yeah, you're right about that.
Yep. Good stuff. That's really good. I don't know if you're making me think back now when my kids were young. I think I hedged my bets. I'm going to confess something here, and I'm going to frame it as a question to you.
Okay.
I think, as Christian parents, sometimes we don't want our kids to be let down by God. And so we frame things in a certain way where we're hedging our bets, which actually trims back our beliefs. Like if I'm really believing for a healing, as an example, well, let me pray, that we get a good doctor instead.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I mean by hedging the bet, so it's like, I don't want to fail in my beliefs. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes absolute sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever struggled with that, or is that something that you've
No,
I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah, I'm weird. I don't think I had that experience because I think a couple things. I think my walk with the Lord, and because of when my kids came, my kids came right in. You kind of know the story with my parents and just everything that happened there with them, passing, and so my first son was born literally at the end of the year that I took to mourn. So he was born right after that year ended. So we got pregnant in Kansas City, and then the year ended. We moved back to Texas, and we had him like a month or two after that. And so my son was born right on the heels of me going through this crazy experience with the Lord of losing everything and almost getting evicted, and then the car getting repoed, and just all the or actually no, so this was the first 5 years. So all the stuff that happened before that was actually the second 5 years. So all the other stuff that happened in the first 5 years, and so by the time my kids came along, I think my relationship with the Lord had been one of just facing so much difficulty, and then also seeing him show up in that difficulty. And so I didn't really have a lot of thoughts about how are you going to experience the Lord. I think my thinking was kind of like, I don't even really understand what's happening here. I just know who God is, and I'm following him, and so I'm going to show you as best as I possibly can how to follow him, and then you'll have to figure that out with him.
Yeah.
So I just kind of I don't know. I think I don't know.
That makes complete sense. I'll share a quick story. So you've had ups and downs, obviously, and we have as well. But we were at a point in our lives where things were clicking very well, and so you have what you dreamed to have, more than you ever dreamed having, and 6 kids in private school, all the things going, and then it all comes crashing in, and I realized that when you have a financial abundance, you're in a position where you can say yes to a lot of stuff, but you have to say no, right? You don't want to raise spoiled kids for, for obvious reasons. But in a weird way, it puts you on a different side of the table as them, because you're the one saying no. They know you can, and you're just not. Right. And but when you lose everything, it's like, we can't. And so let's take it to the Lord. And such a weird thing happened, because you know, husband and wife get together and talk. It's like, do we share our troubles with our children? Should we share our troubles with our children? And we realize, like, we need to do this because, well, we've got to pull them out of private school. There's going to be a lot of changes here. We might lose our house. All of these, like, there are no more cars. There are no more college funds. There's, like, everything has changed. And what the Lord did was reconciled our family. Like, suddenly we all grew closer together. And that was like the thing that you just have no idea that that's actually there. You think you're tight knit until you have nothing. You get real tight knit. Hey, we're all going to live in this bedroom.
You know, I love that, because you actually just reminded me, there was a moment where I wasn't afraid of my kids feeling let down by God, but I was afraid of, I didn't want to be let down by him letting my kids down, if that makes any sense. Like, I actually wasn't really worried about their faith. I was really more worried about, like, how I felt about him putting them through something I didn't want him to put them through. You know? And
because you're provider, protector, and all the things that you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, 100%. And mostly just it was an experiential thing, because I thought about it through the lens of how I would have felt, you know, like, we're in like a 4,000 square foot house, and, you know, and we have this really cool life that we've been living for this period of time. And it seems like maybe we're finally stable and we're going to get to do this thing. And it's like, and then all of a sudden they're going to have to reduce to, you know, like a 1,500 square foot house that is a far cry from what we're in right now. You know, potentially having to share rooms, you know, all this kind of stuff. And so it's like, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, like, I know how I would have felt as a kid if I had to go through that. And so I was very concerned about them having to go through that experience, you know, and I told the Lord, I'm like, Lord, like, I don't want them to have to go through that. And what was crazy is when the time came that it was abundantly clear we were going to have to, you know, go way smaller and way different, I took them to a house that we were looking at. And I was like, all right, let's go look at this place, and let me know how you feel about it. I was blown away by what my kids actually care about. They were like, do we get our own rooms? So I was like, yeah. And they're like, we don't care. I was like, so you don't mind, like, not having this giant house? They're like, it's whatever. Like, as long as we have our rooms and there's a place I can play my Oculus, I really don't care. You know, it's like the biggest thing to me is I just don't want to have to leave my friends. So if I get to stay in the same school, then we're cool. And it was great. Like, it blew my mind, like, how unbothered they were by the whole situation. And so we end up, like, packed into this little bitty apartment, and they're like, oh, dude, this is great. Actually, I like this better than the other place. And I was like, are you serious?
Okay.
Like, what? And so, you know, so it was crazy to see, like, where their priorities are and how, you know, like, the stuff that they are concerned with, like, they're just the material stuff. Like, they're more concerned with, like, do I have my game system? Do we get to travel? Like, that's the only thing that, like, my oldest is bothered by, is that we just don't get to travel. And it's like, but other than that, it's like everything else. He's like, Carrie's like, I got my friends, I've got my room that I don't have to share with anybody. He's like, as long as we get snacks and Junk Food Friday, you know, we're cool. You know, and so, you know, and just, like, watching that thing, and then also they kind of got to see how the Lord showed up for us in the transition. And so, you know, both of them have just tremendous faith in the Lord, as a result of watching this life that we've lived, which is, but I didn't know, you know, I really didn't know, like, that would be the experience. It was such a, it was a powerful and humbling experience to see that who my children are. I was like, man, I was like, Lord, like that is all you. That is not me, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. Awesome. So last question about kids. How do you keep faith real and visible to your kids, not just on Sundays?
Oh, shoot. Well, we haven't been like regular Sunday attending church for almost the entirety of the time that my kids have been around because our life has been so chaotic and we've moved so many times. So I would say I think our life pretty much has done that. I didn't. It's like I wanted to be more intentional, and I just have not been able to be as intentional as I wanted to be. Part of that is because the chaos of our life. Part of that is just because my personality type. I'm not very good at being intentional about things. Like I'm kind of like just doing whatever the thing is that I see, and then I'm in it and I'm doing it. And so, so I have all these great things in my head. I'm like, okay, I'm going to read the Bible every night. That's what we're going to do. And then I get distracted, and it doesn't happen the way I have it in my mind. But I think, yeah, I think that's our life really, I think has been that demonstration, which is in a lot of ways that aligns with what my thinking was going in. I realized that was kind of like one of the other early realizations, like before I had kids, and I was kind of thinking about like, okay, how do I want to do this as a father? And one of the things I understood early on was that you become who your parents are, not what they teach you.
Yep.
And I realized that early on. I was like, all right, so then what I need to do is I need to demonstrate with my life.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been my focus. But I oriented that always on if I teach them nothing else, I need to teach them that God is good and that they can trust him. And if I can get that right, then everything else will figure itself out, And so that's kind of been my focus is just trying to follow God as best as I possibly can, and letting my life be the way that demonstrates. And then the rest is just, I do want to get them into church because that structure is important and healthy for them. And honestly, the only reason we're not right now is because my 3-year-old is not about that life
You're
yet.
3.
And so, yeah, so
Yeah.
we've been dealing with that, but yeah.
Yeah. I think the what I'm hearing you say is that you are making God real for them in how you live, in the acknowledgement that he exists, that he is real, that he is good, that he loves you, he loves them, that Jesus has forgiven you, and everything is possible, right? Like those are kind of the 4 core truths that we tried to teach our kids is God's not just good. He's the greatest good. He's good for you. Right. He's good for me. He's good for all of us. And sometimes what's good for you isn't good for me and vice versa. Right. And so that's why he doesn't always feel good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think that, and then probably like relational type stuff is a big thing. Like we're in our house, we've been very focused on, or just kind of always been very focused on like relationship, like how you treat each other is a big thing. It's like you can be mad, you can feel whatever way you feel or whatever it is, but you don't treat each other like garbage. That's not going to be a thing in our house.
Yeah, our house is a safe place.
Is pretty open. It's like watch whatever you want. We'll talk about it and be some limits on that stuff, but but there's been a lot of I don't know. I feel like most of the stuff is just kind of like as it goes. Like even school. Like I remember early on, my wife and I talked about, are we going to like force them to start, at a certain age or whatever? And I told her, I said, no, I said, when they're ready to go is when we'll send them, I mean, unless they're like, 12 and still don't want to go to school, obviously at some point you got to start learning. But I remembered my experience was, my parents started me early because of where my birthday was. And that starting point was not a great experience. And I just felt like I was behind like my whole life. And so,
interesting.
So I wanted for them to be able to make that choice. And so my youngest wanted to go a little earlier, and my middle wanted to go a little later, and I don't know where my youngest is going to end up, but I'm kind of just treating it the same way. It's like, hey, when you're ready to go to school, we'll go to school. You want to start now? Cool. You want to give it another year? No big deal.
Yeah.
We'll just kind of go
We're
when
here.
you're ready to go. And, yeah, that's it. Yeah. So it's been very interesting. Just kind of, I don't know, man, like just raising them by the Spirit, I think is probably the best way I could put it, because that's kind of, at the end of the day, I think what I've really understood is that if they're God's kids, then He has a way He wants them raised, and so I need to be aware of that and to do the best of my ability to raise them in the way that He wants them to be raised.
Yeah. There will come a point when they need to own their own faith, and so they're borrowing yours until that day. Yep. Yeah.
100%.
That's part of that stewardship. Good deal. So a lot of guys are stuck, maybe doubting, maybe coasting. What would you say to them?
Start. That would be what I would say. Start. Like that's it. Start. Like it's my mom used to tell me back in the day, she said, Dev, if you don't know where you're going, start walking and eventually a path will emerge. And that has been some of the best advice that I have ever gotten in my life, is when you're in that place where you just feel stuck, just start doing something different. Like, it doesn't even matter what it is. If you brush your teeth at night, then start brushing them in the morning. If you get up at 7, get up at 6:48. It just doesn't matter. Like, you have to start disrupting your patterns. That's like one of the big things. The other thing is pray more. Like, I would say, of all the things, like, if I were to say, if anything that you could do, the most important thing is pray more, and if that's like, if you're a 15 to 20 minute a day guy, pray for an hour a day. Make the time. If you have to get up early and cut out, and it doesn't matter if you go, get in your prayer closet or go find a hilltop like I do or whatever it is, and you're just over there talking to air and there's nothing happening, that's okay. Like, give it like the full hour, 2 hours, whatever it takes. Like, pray more. That is the beginning of everything, is that connection with the Lord, because prayer is how we subjugate the mortal material reality that we live in to the spiritual reality of God. And it's not like it is a metaphysical thing, but the thing that happens before the metaphysical thing is a mental thing. When we pray, we are basically telling our brain that what you think is real is less real than this thing that I'm connecting to, right? And that's a really important thing to do.
Yes.
If you want to break a pattern, like, that is where all the patterns begin there. And if you want to change those things, you've got to go higher than where the patterns begin. And so the starting point is subjugating that mental framework to something higher. And so I would say those would be probably the two biggest things, is prayer, doing a lot more praying and doing like long tranche prayer. Obviously reading the word is kind of like a given, but I would say reading in big tranches. Don't read to understand, read to reprogram. So instead of like, people a lot of times they get real myopic and they're like, oh, you need to like focus on the scripture and dissect it and do all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's great once you've gotten further down the path. But if you haven't read the Bible from cover to cover, you need to read in like as big of chunks as you can possibly consume, and don't worry about whether you understood anything that you read. It doesn't matter, because your subconscious is still picking it up. The goal is reprogramming first. Then we get to get into the nuance of all the individual stuff and dissecting it in the Greek and the Hebrew and whatever else, And so I think those are like the big, you want to like make big waves in your life. read large chunks of scripture every single day, pray for an hour a day. And, but if you can't like do all of that right out of the gate, just start doing something different. Anything, doesn't matter what it is, just start doing something different.
Yeah.
And then those would be the things I would immediately do after that.
That's awesome. Break the pattern. Start.
100%. Yeah.
Pray. Read chunks of scripture. Great advice. Yep. Great advice.
Yeah.
All right. So final charge here. If you could go back and talk to your 19-year-old Devin, what would you say?
And I would go back farther.
All right.
I would go back to my 14, 15. It's either 14 or 15. I can't remember which one it is. But I would go back to, no, actually further, 13. I would go back to my 13-year-old Devin, and I would tell him, don't get involved with girls. It's not worth it. I kid you not, man. That would be my advice.
Great advice.
So much heartbreak between 13 and 22 that could have really been avoided had I not been a moron. But at the same time, you know, I don't know. As much as I would like to think that that was avoidable, the truth is that there's a lot of, like, I was a lover in, you know, like early, you know, and because of that, I also had like really poor boundaries, and I didn't understand the function of, like, I would have been the guy that would have just deferred to my wife. Like, I would have been that guy because I didn't understand the necessity of that hierarchy and that structure. And I wouldn't want to upset my wife because I would care more about her feelings than the architecture of things. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of, man, I'd like to think that I could have just avoided all that pain, but in a way, I feel like a lot of that pain was necessary to develop the grittiness that was required early in my marriage, when I had to like lay that foundation, and I had to be, you know, I had to be more, authoritative isn't the right word, but I had to be more structural than emotional in the early goings of the relationship. And there were places where, you know, I had to hold the line on things that didn't seem super important, but they were important to setting the right cadence in our marriage, basically. And so I would say that maybe it may have been that pain was necessary to build some of the grit that was required to actually do some of the things I did later. Because by the time I met my wife, I was just in a very different place. And so the entry into our marriage was very interesting. A story for another time, but yeah, so that would be it.
Right.
I'd go back if I could change anything. I would go back further, and I would that's what I would tell myself, because that's the pain I would like to avoid if I could.
There you go. Stay away from women, young men. They weaken your knees, as Mick told Rocky.
I told my kids when my boys were like 10, I think, I actually, like, a girl was, you know, interested in one of them or something like that, and the other one was, you know, he wasn't like interested, but it was kind of like that path, and I sat him down. I said, "Are you ready to move out?" And they were like,
"What?
We're 10. What are you talking about?"
We're 10.
I was like, okay. I was like, "So you're not ready to move out?" They're like, "No." I was like, "Are you ready to give up all of your space and all of your fun and all the things that you do and take care of somebody like I take care of you?" And they're like, "No, definitely not." And I was like, "Okay, then you're not ready to get married, which means you're not ready for girls." And they're like, "Okay, that's fair enough." So,
there you go. Set them straight.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Set them straight early, man. It's like
women are responsible. Women and responsibility go hand in hand. Yeah, that's beautiful.
That is,
I love it.
100%. Yeah, women and responsibility. Those two things go together.
That's good. All right. What's one fight you believe God is calling men into right now?
Ooh, man, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Fight. men into right now. So it's all part of the same fight, but it is, I think there are three prongs to it. Um, it is, it is the fight to be godly men. Which that sounds trite because it's like, well, duh, like that's always the fight, you know. But in this particular time, there are three very important areas that are just almost destroyed in manhood, at least in the U.S. I can't speak for anywhere else in the world. Purity is a huge one. Like purity for men is under such a level of attack, it's unreal. Like the level of access that we have to inappropriate, you know, content and those types of things, and like the level at which it is foisted upon us. You know, it's like I was taking my son to school and I'm like looking at what these high school girls are wearing and I'm going, like, how in the world is this, like, what the heck?
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
I mean, just mind blowing, you know. And the thing is, it's like it's starting there now, you know. And I'm looking at, like, you know, and again, I want to be cautious in how I position this because this is not about young women need to put clothes on, right? Like that's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that when you dress to provoke, right? Like there is a difference between dressing in a way that is, you know, because it makes you feel good, and dressing in a way that is intended to draw attention to
Entice.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to entice, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a reason that women wear the things that they wear in clubs, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not, you know, and when I say that, adult clubs, let me be clear. Um, so anyway, so my point in that is just that there is a very clear assault on the purity of men,
Yep.
and that is something that desperately has to be attended to, and it's a fight. It's not something like you cannot casually deal with that. Like you have to get a biblical view of sex. You have to get a biblical view of what women are and what they are to us, and all of that. And you have to be like ruthless with yourself in that area. And that sucks. Like it sucks that to have to that we can't be casual about that. You know, it's like we really have to be ruthless about that with ourselves in the area of purity. And so
Yep.
I think purity is one prong, or one pillar, if you will. The second one is in marriages, having the confidence and the strength to lead their houses. As a lot of men have abdicated that role because it's hard. It's hard to be the person who has to say no. You know, nobody wants to be the one that has to say no to their wife. Like that sucks. You know, but we have to do that sometimes, and that's tough. And it's tough to be the one that has to, you know, to uphold the standard while you're simultaneously a human being who fails constantly and sucks. You know, it's like that's one of the burdens of leadership, is that you have to be the guy that says this is not okay in our house while you're simultaneously being the guy that's doing it. You know, it's like you don't get to abdicate your role just because you suck at your role.
Yeah.
It's like you still have to uphold the standard. And so I think that is the second one. Is, you know, we're in a culture right now that has decided that biblical submission is not a real thing, and that was cultural or had to do with all kinds of cultural nonsense, the Artemis or whatever it is that people have come up with for egalitarianism. And there's just a lot of nonsense out there with regard to the way that the marriage is structured hierarchically. And so on that, and this leads into the third pillar, but I want to take a minute on this one because this one's really important, because our culture is fighting against this right now. And it's something that is super important, that as a man, you are the one who has to say, hey, this is how our marriage operates. Now, the wife still has to make a decision about whether they're going to submit to the Lord by submitting to their husband, right? And so it's not a forced thing where the husband goes, you submit to me, woman. It's not like that. But you do have to say, this is how it is. This is what a biblical marriage looks like. This is how we're going to do things. Now, you can either choose to be in alignment with this biblical marriage and come under the headship that you've been given within the marriage, or you can choose not to, right? Like that's your prerogative, but I'm telling you that this is how it is. Right.
Yeah.
And so, and men and boys need to be trained in understanding this so that they have these communications with their wives before they get married. That was one thing I was tremendously blessed with, was that understanding, so that before my wife and I got married, we had these conversations, and I was able to say, like, when the word says submit in everything, that doesn't mean submit in everything but the way that we decorate the house. Like, the house is also my domain too. If I say that the drapes are black instead of blue, the drapes are going to be black, not blue. Like, that is the level of authority that I have in our house. Now, am I going to stomp all over your house and make it black and blue because I'm a jerk and lord that over you? Of course not. I don't care what color the drapes are. It's like,
Right.
But we have to have the understanding, though, that it is all my domain. The authority that you have is authority that is derivative of the authority that is given to me as the head of the house. And so that means that everything is in my domain. It also means that everything is my responsibility. When God shows up and says, this marriage is a wreck, he's not going to come have a conversation with you. He's going to come have a conversation with me. And so we have to have the understanding of how that works, right? And so so that, I think, is hugely important and is hugely lost right now in our culture. And men are going to have to fight, not the women, but they're going to have to fight the culture, and they're going to have to fight their own tendencies to want to just not have to fight it, because men don't want to fight. Like, we don't want to fight about this stuff. We don't want to deal with this. We'd much rather just be like, look, do whatever you want, woman. Like, that's the reality. If you've been married for more than 10 years, believe me, you are at the do whatever you want woman phase. May not be there in 5, but 10, you're going to be there, So it's like, but you got to fight that. Like, we can't do that. 10 years in, we still have to be the leader. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that's the second one. And then the third one is laying down your life for your wife as Christ lays down his life for the church. That is lost in its entirety, and I would say that a lot of the failing in what we're seeing right now, the kickback and the fight that we see from women to overthrow a lot of these roles, is because men, by and large, abdicated that role, and they did such a terrible job of laying down their lives for their wives and loving them as Christ loves the church. They put their own desires and their own things that dreams and things that they wanted to do and ways that they wanted to live. They put those things before their wives, and they weren't willing to die to themselves to raise their wives up. And as a result of that, you have a lot of very damaged young women out there who have pretty bad views of fathers and pretty bad views of men, and it's deserved. There's a lot of men out there that created that problem, and we're dealing with that cleanup now, and we're going to have to fight that. And so the way you fight the second pillar is by doing a really good job in the third.
Yeah, I was going to say they're so intertwined. Yeah,
that's exactly
and
right.
it's that stewardship again, right? So if you lead in your marriage as a steward, right, and the head of the household, and I love what you're saying there. I'm reminded, and one of the things that I've shared with friends is that you're the spiritual leader, and so what that means is that you're responsible for the spirit in your home, right? So what spirit are you bringing? Are you bringing a spirit of anger and lordship and lording over? When I say lordship. Or are you bringing the spirit of love? And are you right? And
that's right.
And so you talked about earlier that you wanted your children to know that you didn't say it in these words, but that that your house is a safe place. Like, this is where we are going to be safe with one another. We're not going to be beating each other up. We're not going to be, right? This is a home of respect. And yeah, so I love it. Purity, marriage, confidence, strength, leading, fighting against the culture. You know, so many men either abuse that strength or they're so wimpy, like they're worthless.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's tough because it's one of those things where we're not really taught effectively how the thing that is both, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, you know, it's so funny in my house. I was really blessed because my wife didn't really have a huge issue with submission. But she is very strong-minded, to say the least.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn to lead and not lord. Because I came from business, so I was never like the guy that's like, I'm the boss. You know, it was never about that. But I was always a very strong leader. It's like, this is how it's going to be, and I expect people to align with that. You know, and if you don't want to align with that, then we can have a conversation, and I'm happy to communicate and dialogue with you and help you understand why it needs to be the way that it is. But at the end of the day, when I say this is how it's going to be, this is how it's going to be. Yeah. You know, and so there's no, like, for me, there was just no, I was abundantly clear that's just how it is. And so when we came into our marriage, he was willing to accept that. But at the same time, she's the kind of person that she's like, okay, so if you want me to do it exactly the way you said to do it, then I'm going to do it exactly the way you said to do it.
No better.
And so, oh yeah, no. And it was funny because what would happen is she would do it so like perfectly the way that I said to do it, that it exposed how bad the way I said to do it was.
That's funny. Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, crap. I was like, that didn't work.
Darn it.
And so, and so there was this process of learning how to hear her and receive her gifting, and the wisdom that she had without subjugating myself to her, right? Because the thing is as men, if you have a wife who's actually really intelligent or really wise, it's easy to just get to the point where you just start deferring to her and everything, because it's like, oh, this is way better than having to actually make decisions, you know? And my wife is one of those that I could absolutely do that with, you know? And so it's like, so that finding that place of like, okay, my job is to lead, and I have to lead, but at the same time, I don't want to lead in a way that is diminishing to her, but you have to start with the foundation. And this is, you know, I talk about this in the biblical marriage teaching that I did, but it's one I probably actually want to revisit, to be honest, because I don't see marriages as, I think most people look at marriages like this kind of flat thing, whereas I look at it as a sequential thing. So the marriage begins with submission and laying down the life, right? So the wife submits to the husband lays down his life. Both people are dying to themselves in that process. The wife is dying to herself by having to submit to a man, and the man is dying to himself by having to love a woman that sometimes is just not lovable. Right? And so, you know, so both parties are having to die to themselves in that process. And through that process, what you actually discover is it follows the same trajectory of our relationship with the Lord. We start with submission. Both of us are submitting to the Lord's will in that way of submitting to those roles. And in our relationship with the Lord, we have to begin with submission, because we are not at a point yet where we can agree with him about the things that he wants to do. We don't have the wisdom to agree with him yet. And so we can't start with agreement. We actually have to start with submission. And then through submission, we begin to discover that we can't actually do this on our own, which brings us into reliance. So the wife goes through this process of submission. That submission process then brings her to a place of reliance, where she has to rely on the Lord to endure while her husband is learning how to be a husband. And the husband, in the same way, has to rely on the Lord to be able to continue loving his wife while she's reacting to all of his shenanigans and dealing with all her own baggage. When it's so unnatural to us, like it would be way easier for husbands to submit to wives and wives to love husbands. Like people don't talk about that nearly enough.
That's interesting.
Because loving comes naturally to women, and submitting is an order thing. So men, it's like we submit to bosses all the time. Like we understand how this process works.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
hierarchies are pretty normal for us. It's a binary. Love is far more messy and there's like way more difficult. And so it's like so I think the way it works is a marriage is actually supposed to model very similarly to our relationship with the Lord. You go through submission, reliance, and then eventually you come to agreement. And so if the process works correctly, a marriage should begin in submission, it should move into reliance, and then you should end in agreement, where now my wife, she's submitted to me, but she doesn't have to be submitted to me because we just agree. Like if there's something where we're in disagreement, which is very, very rare, when we run across those situations, I don't have to pull the husband card. Like we just sit down and have a dialogue about it. And usually what ends up happening is it's like, okay, cool. Like I understand where you're coming from on that. Let's seek the truth, because what I think and what you think doesn't matter. The question is what's true, what's the best, and then once we figure that out, it's like, oh, well, this is the best. We can both agree on
Let's
that.
go do
No
that.
big deal. And then we roll on. Yeah. And so I think the goal of marriage is to get to agreement. But I think the mistake a lot of people make is they try to start in agreement, and you can't. It doesn't work that way. You have to start in proper order and then grow into that. And so, anyway, so all of that to say, I want to circle back to one thing before we jump off, which is purity. The reason I put purity at the beginning is that you basically lose your power when you are giving your power to impurity. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of men are so weak in their marriages, is that there is something that happens when you are tied up in sexual immorality that just, man, it just sucks the power out of you. And so as a result of that, what you end up with is these very weak and powerless men, because they've given their power, like Samson to Delilah, right? They've given their power over to impurity. And so they have to operate as a husband in a position that needs power, but they're in a powerless state. And so they end up leading out of emotion, leading out of force, and all of these other things that would not be necessary if they had power. And that is why purity is so incredibly important, because you're powerless to fulfill your function. You have the authority, like the authority is given by God. It doesn't matter whether your wife, like my wife could not submit to me. That doesn't change the fact that I still have authority in our house. So it's like, I have the authority. She can do whatever she wants, but that doesn't change my authority, And so it's like, when you understand that, then the question becomes the issue of power, and you have to have the power to be able to advocate for her in that place, like Moses advocated for the people when they rejected God's authority. And he's like, Lord, don't smite them, please. Right? It's like when you understand your position, it's like, if my wife rejects my authority, it's like, I don't have to feel a way about that. It's like, my position is, holy crap, I need to pray for you, because you are stepping out from under the authority that has been given for your protection. And so I need to advocate for you in this moment, not fight with you in this moment. It's like, but you can't do that if you're powerless and all caught up in impurity. It strips you of the power that you need to attend to that position. So anyway,
it forces you to live hiding, right?
It does. Yeah. No, it's so bad. It's shame and just so much other garbage that comes in through that window that wrecks husbands, man.
Yeah. I've never equated purity to power before, so it's really interesting as you were talking, because I was thinking about, like, if you put bad gas in a car, it's just not going to go very good. That's just impure. These impurities just don't make you go the way you should be able to go. Right.
Oh yeah. And there is something to sexual immorality that directly correlates to power, and you can see it in the life of David. Like almost every great man in history has been taken down by sexual immorality.
Yep. Interesting.
There's a very clear correlation to impurity and power. That's kind of interesting. I've never dug into it to like really flesh that out the rest of the way. I actually think I'll do a Tuesday night on that at some point, because that's a topic that I think it merits it. But yeah.
All right. So Tuesday nights live on TikTok. That's what you do. What time is that at?
8:30 p.m. Central Time, TikTok Live, and all of those get loaded up to YouTube. So if anybody wants to catch them up, if they miss one, you can find them on YouTube. I load them within 24, 48 hours.
Awesome. Wow. Well, we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, no doubt, man.
Super enjoyed it. Yeah, really, really enjoyed our conversation today. And thank you so much for taking the time and sharing the word and a little bit of your story. How can people who want to follow up with you and support what you're doing, where you want to send them?
Probably just go to thequietchurch.org. Everything is kind of centralized there. And then from there, if they want to support, there's a support button. If they want to follow, all the links to Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, they're all on there. The vast majority of my content gets created on TikTok, and then it's disseminated into Facebook and YouTube. So outside of the TikTok lives, those are exclusively on YouTube, because you can't load 2.5-hour teachings on TikTok. So, but outside of that, if you miss the live on TikTok, that is exclusively on YouTube. But everything else, the vast majority of the content gets created on TikTok. So if you want to get like the freshest version, follow me there. But if you're not on TikTok, you're more of a YouTube or Facebook person, the content gets pushed into both of those funnels, and so you can catch the bulk of it on those channels as well.
Awesome. Quietchurch.org. Devin, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate you, Mike.
Yeah, to our listeners, thanks for listening in. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You had a marathon podcast today. And like, share, follow, Dad Mode, God, Grit, and Goals. Remember our 4 core truths. God is good. Jesus has forgiven you. You are loved, and everything is possible. Have a great day.